Oh, it's about to go down in the club. We open with a gliding shot of the ranch, and then a shot that gives Mary Crosby the Fast Times at Ridgemont High treatment 3 years before that film came out. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. The shot is unapologetically what it is, and it really, really works.
Hi, Brad. You know how cute I always thought you were.
JR isn't even subtle in his lusting after Kristin now, even with Miss Ellie right there.
I said more juice, JR?
Yeah, well, the waitress should have taken it back.
He hands Kristin a towel and mentions how much he'll miss her when the Shepherds move back to Santa Fe. With visions of bikinied Kristin dancing through his head, he tells Sue Ellen he wants to go back upstairs. Sue Ellen doesn't find his sudden lustful cravings all that charming. JR arrives at the office and tells Connie to get Llewellyn some nice silver for the wedding and charge it to the Ewing account. Well, JR always did know the importance of a good marriage. Jordan Lee storms in and says the cartel will have to squeeze JR out if Cliff Barnes continues to come down on all of them. JR tells Bobby to up the pressure in Austin to force Cliff out, but Bobby tells him it's low on his list of priorities. JR meets with Alan Beam to get an update on the other front of the assault, the plan to create a mirage of a congressional campaign so Cliff will run toward it and away from the Office of Land Management. JR tells Alan to accelerate the plan if he wants to stay in JR's good graces.
Just stop physical. I'm the type who won't get up so critical. So let's make things physical.
At dinner, Patricia tells everyone she just wishes Kristin would marry the right man. She doesn't seem very high on Kristin getting her architecture degree and making her own way in life. In fact, neither does Kristin, who seems more intent on staying in Dallas rather than going to Santa Fe or California. JR quickly takes advantage of the situation, setting up Kristin with a job as a secretary while Luella is out, and also arranging for her to have her own little love nest in the city. And then we get one of the creepiest, shudder-inducing examples of banal evil the show ever produced, as Patricia and Kristin calmly plot to drive Sue Ellen away from JR and replace her with Kristin so that the family can still be close to money. Of course, neither of them actually comes right out and says that. They just talk about choices and what's best. This is one of the best scenes in the show, and it firmly establishes Kristin as a social climbing sociopath who just wants to please her. Oh, I see what you did there.
What else do you want from me?
At the office, JR fails to convince the cartel to go in on a new venture with him, some South Pacific Asian oil wells. In fact, they want to get as far away from Ewing Oil as they can. They do, however, take an interest in Kristin, who showed up to her first day of work in a highly office-appropriate top. The Kristin is so eager to weaponize her sexuality makes her a perfect pairing for JR.
Boys, where are your minds? That happens to be my wife's little sister.
JR's South Pacific contact tells him that his people are going to get cold feet if the cartel isn't behind JR. So JR tells him that he's willing to go all in on the deal by himself. His consultant gives him some insider information about how much money Ewing Oil is going to have to pony up for the wells. Stick a pin in this conversation, it's going to be a big deal. Literally. The amount is so extravagant that Von Leland, the Ewing's go-to banker, says he can't approve a loan of that size and risk. JR reminds him that Ewing Oil put Von where he is today, so Von agrees to do his best. On his way out, JR delivers his new thesis for the season.
Survival's not enough. I intend to be the biggest, most powerful independent in Texas.
Meanwhile, Cliff and Pam have an expository conversation that sums up Pam's situation with some clunky dialogue. Bottom line, Pam is in a pickle because she's pregnant with a baby that may die because of her genetic condition, neurofibromatosis.
Neurofibromatosis.
She hasn't told Bobby because he'd be so disappointed in her inability to have children, and he'd be worried sick about baby John. Oh, and Cliff hates abortion.
But you also know what your brother thinks about abortion. I hate it.
Cliff's opinion on things should be the least relevant of anyone's on the show. Yes, behind Muriel's. Pam agrees to talk to Bobby about it, but also asks Cliff to back off and stop stressing everyone out. He refuses and says he wants to destroy JR to get his own child back. I'm not sure that tracks, but Cliff never really needed an excuse to go after JR. Outside, Sue Ellen catches JR and Kristin flirting on the porch, but nothing comes of that because we jump over to Bobby and Pam. Bobby learns that Pam is pregnant, But this time, Bobby refuses to let Pam finish a sentence.
Bobby, I've got to talk to you about something, and dinner's almost ready.
Forget dinner, we're dining out.
Good God, this is frustrating. Bobby announces to the family before Pam has the chance to tell him the other half. By then, there's no point. Kristin is disappointed that Sue Ellen isn't reacting to her flirting with JR, and Sue Ellen wisely refuses to give her the satisfaction of getting a rise out of her.
I mean, don't you care about anything? What you saw yesterday? JR and me?
Was there something you wanted me to see, Kristin?
JR intervenes and tells Kristin her apartment is ready. At the office, we see Kristin scheming to make sure she's permanently installed even when Luella comes back. Bobby refuses another trip to Austin and accuses JR of trying to hide something. He openly calls JR out for his attention to Kristin. JR feigns innocence, of course, and then immediately offers to show Kristin around her new bachelorette pad. Kristin tells JR she's not down to be a one-night stand. She wants something more permanent by his side, but he won't commit to any promises. JR does get some more definitively good news. Von Leland was able to put together a consortium of banks to secure the loan to purchase the Asian offshore wells JR has been so hot and bothered about. The only caveat is that JR will have to put up South Fork as collateral.
South Fork is my home. I was born there. I'm sorry. Not open to discussion.
This time my hands are tied.
JR is so preoccupied that he barely acknowledges Alan Beam's attempts to curry his favor on the Barnes for Congress scheme.
I have a lot of work piling up here. I really don't know how I'm going to get at it.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to show you this.
Don't be a simp, Alan. Alan introduces himself to Bobby and figures out that Bobby is in the dark on most of JR's schemes. Bobby approves of Alan and JR being in bed together. In the business sense, of course.
Alan, I think you and JR are going to get along just fine.
It's not subtle.
At dinner, Digger tells Pam not to tell Bobby about the neurofibromatosis and to think positively.
That long-sounding name, that disease I gave you.
This is a 180-degree turn in Digger's character now that Wynn is playing him.
But you can't dwell on that. It was a long time ago.
JR asks Vaughn to keep the loan under wraps because he doesn't want Harv Smithfield messing up the deal with his old-timey country law-talking ways. Kristin interrupts with a message from JR's Asian oil well fixer. They got the bid. Vaughn reminds him that means South Fork is really on the line now. But these oil wells seem like a sure thing. I'm sure it won't ever come up again. Connie badmouths veggie burgers like a good Texan.
I had something called a veggie burger. Never again.
Well, we got the veggie burger with Brussels sprouts. Not Brussels sprouts.
But Kristin wants to talk about the business. Connie finds a euphemistic way to tell Kristin she needs to get laid and stop worrying about the business world. This would make Connie the antagonist in every girl boss movie from Working Girl to The Devil Wears Prada. When Kristin doesn't get the answer she wants, she snoops through JR's desk while he's out. Kristin is pure evil, but I do admire her industriousness. Back at the ranch, everyone is fawning over Little John.
Okay!
And Jock tells Pam she can pick out a horse if she wants.
Hey, Pam. We'll let you pick out the horses. One for him and one for you, huh?
Well, that's awkward in retrospect. Pam excuses herself to go lie down, the go-to move for pregnant Ewing women. JR signs the paperwork on the loan and toasts to his own success. And we're reminded of just why he needed this deal to go through in the first place. Because these are foreign wells, Cliff Barnes can't touch this deal.
And Mr. Barnes can go straight to hell.
Back at the Love Nest, Kristin tells JR she's figured out that JR is up to something, and that she could tell Bobby or Jock if she wanted to. She rightly says that if JR goes down, that doesn't help her one bit, so she's not going to use that information. Yet. This seems to turn JR on, and they get down to it. And we're out. I feel comfortable calling this the first real episode of Season 3. The first few episodes were wiping away the detritus of Season 2, and the neurofibromatosis storyline is about to get waved away. Sort of. Kristin's connection to Ewing Oil and JR is going to have far-reaching consequences, though. Even into the 2012 series reboot. Mary Crosby has incredible presence here, even if she's not the best actress in most of her scenes. That's not a knock, she's just up against some heavyweights. It's not just that she looks amazing in a bikini or a sleeveless top, but director Irving J. Moore makes sure that we know that that's the case. It's that she understands that she can go over the top with how conniving she makes the character, as long as it's rooted in some understandable desire. This is Kristin's season, and she is one of the better antagonists of the show. The other disturber and rival for JR's affections is Randy Powell's Alan Beam.
Alan Beam.
Who turns in an admirable performance, but his character just isn't as interesting or formidable in the grand scheme of things. Dallas is about to have its best season. and it's largely thanks to these multiple moving parts being arranged this early in the season, and then continuing to turn into one another. Oh yes, this is the good stuff.